Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Rise of the Phoenix, and this video is going to be my second video in my new series of faction deep dives. This video will focus on Arnor and Gondor. I chose to combine these two factions because of their similarities. They unlock their quarters in the same order, and they have tier 4 troops that fulfill similar roles. But before we get into things, if you enjoy my content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You may notice that I have a super tiny baby town hall. That's because I started a new account. Well, it's really my account that rolled over into Season 3. I went ahead and created a city in it. I don't know, what would you call it? A castle? A city? Town hall, I guess? Main hall? Anyways, whatever. Threw it into Gondor because A, they weren't full, and B, this video is going to talk about Gondor and Arnor. So let's start off with the faction bonuses. Gondor gets minus 5% construction time. Doesn't seem particularly exciting to me. Arnor gets 5% reduced construction cost, which is somewhat okay, I guess, because I'm pretty sure it also applies to forts, if I remember correctly. So you can actually save some gold over the course of an entire season, which in the early and mid game, that could potentially mean an earlier 10 of 10 on one of your important units on their skills. In the long run, I tend to just have way too much gold by the late points in seasons anyway, so that doesn't matter. So Arnor's is not super exciting. It does make your early game a little bit smoother and lets you get forts up for cheaper, I do believe. Somebody please fact check me on that, by the way, if I'm wrong. I'm just pretty sure I remember that from when I was playing Arnor in Season 1. As for their Tier 4 units, Gondor gets the Swan Knight, which has quite nice stats, honestly. They have 98 health and 66 defense, so they're actually even more tanky by a little bit than Cataphracts. Cataphracts do have the advantage of having full protection, so they might end up coming out to be more tanky against specifically melee units. I haven't run the math on it, but I'm pretty sure minus 15% for melee would be better than a little bit more health and defense on these Swan Knights. However, these Swan Knights have a super cool ability called Protector. For the first 3 rounds, they gain 100 bonus defense. They go up to 166, which is quite substantial. And they take all damage from normal attacks on behalf of their allies. This lets them run some pretty cool army compositions. Like you could look at double ranged, for example, as a potential for Gondor. Or it lets you protect your high damage cavalry units like Cavaliers. I think as Gondor, you're way more likely to be running full cavalry armies with these guys soaking damage while units like Cavaliers do a whole bunch of damage. But you could potentially run some crazy thing like these guys and 2 ranged units or whatever. Arnor has the Ranger of the North, which is unfortunately not a very good unit. It's a low damage ranged unit that is quite a lot tankier than normal ranged units, and it has a very similar ability to the Swan Knight's Protector. It's just that theirs is they absorb attacks for other ranged units, and it's always active. So the Swan Knight only takes hits for the first 3 units. The Ranger of the North always takes normal attack hits on behalf of other ranged units that they're paired with. So as Arnor, you could potentially, I think they are way more likely to run a double or triple ranged unit army if you even want to mess with Rangers of the North. It's kind of debatable whether or not they're really worth it. I think they're a really cool unit. I think this Swan Knight is way more viable. Their damage isn't terrible. I mean, it's not like Cavalier damage, but that's not their job. Their job is to take hits for the rest of your army, and they are very, very good at that job. Of course, they also have mounted like every other mounted unit. Let's talk about which quarters and unit buildings I think these factions should upgrade early game. Obviously, you have to do your militia stuff, your horseman, stable, and ranger. I think These are 5, 5, and 3 for chapter objectives. So, of course, you have to do those. The good news is that the Horseman stable is what's going to ultimately unlock Cataphracts, which are an incredible unit, and you will probably be wanting to use them anyway. The militia line is okay. The issue is that it's designed to counter enemy cavalry, and when you're fighting tiles, you don't necessarily know what you're going to go up against. So I would probably run dwarven infantry units instead, because they tend to be more durable, at least by a little bit. They have a little bit more health and defense, but importantly, they have shielding. Even the T2 guys do, whereas these T2 guys do not. So if you are going to put some gold into these guys, which might be more important after this most recent balance patch that increases the cost of T3 and T4 units, I think it's going to be more important to use full T2 armies for a longer period of time, in which case investing some gold into your tier 2 units will probably pay off in the long run. So for me personally, I would invest in the Dwarven Footmen because I think I'm going to get more mileage out of them than I am the Militia line, especially with Guardians having anti-burn damage now. I also think that having easy early access to Axe Throwers is great, as these guys are super awesome for taking 200 power tiles. I will say, if you're going to be focusing mostly on cavalry commanders, I'd probably skip the Axe Throwers. As far as the Elven Quarters go, unless you really want access to Sentinels early on, or if you're running cavalry commanders and you want to pick up Bow Knights once you start pushing into 200 power tiles rather than Master Throwers, I think that is a reason to upgrade these buildings. But other than that, I think I would skip the Hunter range and the Warden training ground. Then Rohirrim Quarters is really going to depend again on which commanders you're using. If you're using like Eowyn and Theoden as two of your primary commanders in the early game, you're definitely going to want to unlock Cavaliers. I think Cavaliers pair excellently with Swan Knights, so I think in the long run, you're going to want these guys relatively early on anyways. The Sharpshooters, if you are using Gandalf the Grey as one of your primary commanders, these guys can be good to invest in. So it's really going to depend on what you want to do. As far as like the Warden training ground, I don't see a world in which I would be going after these guys super early on. Maybe if you have like Gil-galad or something as a primary commander. But in general, Dwarven infantry make really good tanks. Axe throwers are very nice against 200 power tiles if you're not running a cavalry commander. Bow Knights are better than Master Throwers if you are running cavalry commanders, so I would pick between one of those two to help you out with 200 power tiles. Definitely take the Horseman stable all the way up, and in my opinion, especially if you're running cavalry commanders, but probably even if you're not, I think I would pick up Cavaliers as well, just because of how nicely they pair with Swan Knights, and you're going to want to use Swan Knights, and you're going to have to unlock them anyway as part of your chapter objectives. I would skip the Ranger training grounds unless you find yourself in an early war with one of the Elven factions. You will have to take it to 3 eventually for your chapters, but you can save a lot of resources by not worrying about upgrading that in the early game. I would much rather be bringing things like Cataphracts, Bow Knights, and T4s, or potentially Cavaliers to my 200 power tiles than I would want to bring like Wardens and things like that. All right, as far as recommended commanders, we did just talk about a couple of them. I'll go in the tavern. I don't even know which commanders this guy has unlocked. I guess we'll find out even from the tavern. I think, yeah, I have no good side commanders because this was my evil account. So Eowyn, super great commander for Gondor because you can run full men cavalry armies with her, and that's exactly what she wants. Dwalin is always a good choice in my opinion. He is an extremely versatile commander, able to heal and support his troops or able to do tons of damage on his own, which pairs well with things like Cataphracts and Swan Knights, both of which are quite tanky. As with all good side factions, Gandalf the Grey is just a absolutely phenomenal commander. He's good with pretty much everything. I can't think of a situation where I wouldn't want to use this guy. He's just so freaking incredible. It's kind of ridiculous how good he is. And as Gondor, I think Theoden would be a good commander to use. I think Legolas and Gimli would also be fine, just because they are also able to do plenty of damage while your Cataphracts and Swan Knights tank for you. I want to suggest Imrahil. I thought he was going to be pretty decent, but somebody did mention in the YouTube comments that they also thought he was going to be decent, and then like him or people on his server used Imrahil and was like, this guy's actually not nearly as good as I thought he would be. I just thought his Respect 5 title sounded insane. Like, you get stun immunity and madness immunity for 1 point, which to me that seems crazy. And then if you take it to the max level, you can have your Cataphracts and Swan Knights go up to plus 6 HP. I'm not sure that it would be worth 15 points, really 14 extra points, because I think you're always going to want the stun and madness immunity for 1 point no matter what. I don't know if it would be worth the 14 points for the plus 6 HP, but it might be. So I would like to suggest him, but I don't want to say for certain that he would be good for Gondor when I have heard other people say he was very disappointing and I haven't used him myself. As far as suggested commanders for Arnor, of course, Gandalf the Grey. Dwalin, Dwalin is just super versatile, just like Gandalf the Grey. Very, very versatile commanders. Legolas and Gimli are both great damage dealers. If you want to try something crazy and off the wall, you could invest in Haldir to pick up his Respect 5 title and run triple ranged unit armies with Rangers of the North tanking for you. He also has shield training to let ranged units take less damage, which pairs nicely with Rangers of the North, protecting your other units and tanking all of that damage. I can't remember. I feel like I tried this in Season 1 on my Arnor account, but I can't remember exactly how it went. I know it's something I've thought about before, and I would love to see it in action or hear from somebody else who has tried it specifically with Arnor for those Rangers of the North. And we will wrap this video up. Oh, I just checked my notes. I forgot to mention cavalry commanders could still be good as Arnor if you're in Season 2 or beyond, because they have access to, let's go ahead and find a camp here, to Bree Riders. So Arnor has relatively easy access to Bree Riders, and they are men, and they are melee cavalry. And so that is exactly what Eowyn, for example, wants. So I really think you could probably get away with running full cavalry armies, even as Arnor, even though you don't have T4 cavalry. I still think the commander support is so incredible for good side cavalry that you can probably be pretty successful even without a T4 cavalry unit. All right, we'll wrap it up now for real by talking about the political situation of these two factions. Unfortunately, both find themselves in pretty precarious situations. Arnor is completely surrounded by potential enemies. They are close to Lindon, they're close to Lothlorien, they are close to Angmar, and they are close to Isengard. Thankfully, most of the time, Isengard is not a particularly popular faction. Neither is Lindon or Angmar. Unfortunately, Lothlorien is like the most popular faction, or at least up there. And they stand pretty much directly between you and Dol Guldur. I mean, you can go way up north and around, you can come down south and around. Both of those are much less direct and more painful routes than just going straight through Lothlorien. However, on most servers, I don't think Arnor can really compete with Lothlorien just in terms of sheer player numbers. Loth tends to be a full faction, Arnor tends to be a very low played faction. Then Gondor is also in somewhat of a precarious situation. You have Rohan to the north. It's a little bit awkward to get to Rohan or for them to get to you. However, it is definitely still possible. It's definitely not unheard of. But more importantly, you have Mordor directly to your east. Mordor is one of the strongest factions and one of the most popular factions, definitely the most popular evil faction. Last time I checked the Discord community roles thing where everybody can pick a faction on the official Discord, I believe Mordor was the second most popular faction, just behind Lothlorien. Either way, they are very commonly a full faction, and you're going to have to make a very tough decision early game as Gondor. You can either try to ally with Mordor and hope that it works out. The risk of this is Osgiliath is right here, and your capital is right here. So it is very easy for Osgiliath and then Minas Tirith to fall back to back. There's not even a critical crossing right here. If Osgiliath falls, it's kind of like in the movies. I just watched Return of the King recently. I feel like somebody says something about like if Osgiliath falls, then like Minas Tirith is screwed or whatever. And that seems pretty true in this case as well. So the risk is that at some future point in time, Mordor could backstab you if you ally with them, and then they have very, very easy access to your capital. So it is a risk. However, it can be a very strong alliance. It secures a ton of really safe territory for both of those factions. I guess now that we're into Season 3 on some servers, potentially you could ally with Varyags and then like gang up on Mordor. But yeah, your second option would be to go to war with Mordor early on, primarily to prevent them from having access to Mumakils, because if they get to sit around and recruit large stacks of Mumakils, they can become extremely threatening. Even when they're outnumbered, those Lurtz Muma armies can just chew through tons and tons of armies, and they become very, very scary, very, very quickly late game if they are left to their own devices and left to play Farmville, build up their economies, and get Mumas. So both factions are very complicated and intricate to play diplomatically. So if you are going to try your hand at that, I wish you the best of luck. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful. Let me know what you think about Gondor and Arnor down in the comment section. I'll see you in the next one. Rise of the Phoenix, over and out.